Hello and welcome back. This is Lesson 17, is APCS Term 2, Lesson 17. What we're trying to do is a binary search, and basically binary search means we're going to take the array and basically we're going to find the average of the center value, 9, determine if it's high or low. And if this is too low, we're gonna take the second part of this and then take the average value again and determine if that's going to be high or low. And then if that's too high, then we're going to take these two values and and take the average. And if we can find it, great. If we can't find it, then what we want to do is we want to return the value of -1. So for example, I kind of have this one working, but I don't want to give away all the details. So I'm going to do a search for the number 11. It's not going to find it. Let me compile it and run it. And should return the value of -1. Okay, so right there is a -1. It also returns a true value just because I was testing something before. But let's go through this code, and I think I can get you started on it at least. So I have a system.out.println is sorted. So if this is true, it'll print out a true value, which it does. If it's false, it would print out a false value. This, by the way, is not required, or the printout value is not required by Lesson 17, so don't have it print out true. But down at the bottom here, I have a method that determines if an array of integers is in sorted order. And it returns a true if it's in sorted order and returns a false if it's not in sorted order, because that's what it asks you to do here. And so that's all I'm doing, is printing out that fact that it is in sorted order. And I have that working, but I don't have the binary search part working out. But what I did, I said, well, if is sorted, that means it's going to be a true value. You don't have to say equals true. You can if you want, but just saying is sorted and then throwing in the array, if that comes back as true, it'll trigger this part inside here. And this is really the part that we want to run if it's true, and don't run if it's false. So if this were out of order, then we wouldn't get a negative value here. For example, let me change this to a 15, compile, run, and it returns a false and doesn't return a -1. So it didn't even run this part right in here. And that's kind of what we wanted to do. Let's change that back to a 5. Okay, so let's talk about the code and how we would go about solving this problem. And it's really not that difficult, but it does take a little bit of thought. And this is the skeleton of the code. And what I have is I have a couple of integer values here. The easiest one is the index of b. That is well, let's go to this one here first. B value is the number of the value that I'm sending in. In this case, it's 11. So I sent in a number of 11, and B value is equal to 11. I just put it into B value because I like to give it a word that I can associate and easily. I could have just used the word B or the letter B, but I like to convert it to the word B value. And then index of B is I want to find out if 11 corresponds to any of these values, and if it does, I want to return the index of B, this value right here. Right now the index is -1, meaning it hasn't been found yet. But if this B value ever gets to be a value that I'm looking for, I want to return either a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or a 3, 4, or 5 to tell the user where in the array it is. And then what I need is the high value and I need the low value. Because like I said, I want to take all these values, find the average of find the center value of that, which is 9, and decide, is the number I'm looking for, 11, is that greater than or less than, is 9 greater than or less than 11? And since 9 is less than 11, I want to now make this my low value. So my low value then would become 0, 1, 2, 3 right here. And I want to find the center value of these values here. So this would be 5 and a 3. You add those together, you divide by 2, and you get a 4. And that would be this value, I think, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it'd be this value. And then I test to see, well, is that value equal to 11? And if not, then if it's less than, then this becomes my low value, and so on and so forth, until I finally get it to where it returns the value that I want, until it actually finds the value that I'm looking for. Okay, so this is all I have written down here because I didn't want to give it away. But what I did is I have a while loop, and I just decided, well, while the index of b is equal to -1, in other words, while we haven't found it, I want it to run this bit of code. So, and once it finds it, I want it to break. And once it breaks, it comes down here and returns index of b. See how that works? So I start off with index of b is equal to -1. I do some fancy footwork inside here. Once I find that value, I have it break. It breaks out and then returns index of b. So up here, instead of returning a -1, it would return 4 or 5 or something like that. All right, so let's look at the algorithm here. And let's see, is this the first one that I want? No, that's not the first one that I want. Let me go over and show you this one here first. Kind of the end game here is going to be this. Okay, so let me rework it here. This is what I'm shooting for. But like I said before, so I'm going to work it again. Show you how I came up with it. The high and the low value is easy to calculate, right? 5 and a 0. And then the b value is, I was looking for, let's pretend like I'm looking for a 7, like I was before. And then I find the average of those. This high value is 5, not the value itself, it's the index of 12 is 5. And then the index of the 3 is 0. So I'm using 5 and 0, because what I want to do is find the average of those. 5 plus 0 is 5, divided by 2 is 2.5, but I'm going to take an integer, so it's just going to be 2. Well, if I look over here, and 2 is halfway between 0 and 5. I mean, it's not exactly halfway because you actually have two numbers right here. But I'm going to take the, the integer, which is this one, and I'm going to return this value back into a mid. I'm going to apply this to the integer mid. And I'm going to put this over here, and a mid is equal to the value of 7. And once this value here, the a mid value, is equal to the value I'm looking for, what I do is I transfer this value here, mid, over to the index of b, and then this is where I break, and then I break out, and then, oh, that was way down at the end there. When I break out, it does the return the index of b part here. Okay, does that kind of make sense a little bit? But that was an easy one. That's if it happens right at the very beginning. Okay, let's see if I can get this in the middle here. Let's see, what was I trying to do with this one here? Okay, let's pretend like I'm looking for the value 10 here. So let me cover up some of this stuff so you don't get lost. Okay, so I'm looking for the value of 10. So my high value is 5, low value is 0, the average is 2. So the a mid is 7. 7 is less than 10, so I still haven't found it, right? So that's going to stay as a -1. 7 is less than 10, and the algorithm that I have set up is that if 7 is less than 10, I move my mid value to my low value and do the whole process over again. And that's where that iteration step would come in. I just have it in a while loop, so it just goes back up to the while loop because the while is still -1. And since that's the case, it never gets out of that while loop until that -1 changes into something else. So now I add these two together. My average is 3. That's this value right here. I put that value over here. 9 is less than 10, right? So this stays as a -1, and now my 3 comes down. My mid value becomes my low value again, and then 5 plus 3 is 8. 5, 6, yep. And then divided by 2 is 4. That value goes over here. A sub 4 is 10. 10 is equal to 10. So in this case, just like I did before, once I found the value, this value goes over here, becomes my index of b. Once this is no longer -1, it breaks out of that while loop. Remember, that while loop is right here. This is my code I have written out here. Remember, it breaks out of this while loop, hits the return value, and returns a +4 in this case. Okay, so it seems like this would do it. I just have to remember that if a sub mid is less than the b value, that I take this value and put it over here. Now you have to think about it a little bit. It's like, well, what if a mid is greater than the b value? Well, if it's greater than the b value, I'd actually do something with this value here instead. So instead of this one coming down over here, I would take this one and move it down over to, I would take my mid value and change that over to here. So it's either going to go here or my mid value is going to go here. Okay, so I'm going to either search like this section or this section, depending on if it's high or low. So make sure you think about that a little bit. It's the same process as the other one. So the trick is that trying to figure out that whenever these values, whenever this is equal to that value, make sure you change your index of b, and then that gets to be what's returned. All right, well, it all sounds easy enough, but there's a problem. As with all coding, nothing ever works out just like you think it's going to be, and that is, what if the value is the very last value or the very first value? This is where I ran into some problems, and so I found out an easy way to fix it, but I want you to think about it a little bit. And the problem here is that if I were to look for something inside here, let's say if I were to look for like the 10, okay, let's say I'm going to look for the 10. And so I take the average of those and I come up with, what did I say before, the 2 or something like that, and then that was less than that. I can't remember exactly. How did that go? That was a 2. So then I changed it to a 5 and a 3. Oh, okay, yeah. So it came out to be that. So it ends up, I changed the mid value to the low value. So I ended up finding the average of that. Well, that's great. You know, the average of that turns out to be 10. And then I just return the 10 value, right? So it works out as long as the value is not 3 and it's not 12. So that becomes a bit of an issue. So let me show you what happens. And that is, so the high value is 5, the low value is 0, 2. The a sub 2 is 7. You put that over there. 7 is less than 12, so that's -1 still. 7 is less than 12, so I bring down my 2. So now I want to search between 5 and 2. And sort of the same thing. The average of 5 and 2 is 3. 5 and 2 is right here, 3. And the third value is 9. 9 is less than 12, so I'm going to have that come down over here. And so it went from 0 to 2 to 1, the lowest value. The average of 5 and 3 is 8. The value at 4 is, or sorry, the average of 5 and 3 is 8. Divided by 2 is 4. The value at a sub 4 is 10. 10 is less than 12, so that stays as a -1. It's less than 12, so I'm going to move that value down here. Now we're going to come up with 5. The average of 5 and 4 is 9. Divide that by 2, that's 4.5, so it's 4. We're getting into some repetition here. Value of 4 is 10. So a sub 4 is 10. 10 is less than 12. So now that stays as a -1. This one goes down over here. Okay, so now you can see clearly that we just start repeating ourselves. So in this case, it's going to return a -1 because it can't find what it did. And there's another part of the program that you're going to have to think through a little bit. But you got to be careful with if the value is the very last one or the very first one. So think about that for a little bit. Maybe you could do something with your indexes here. That's how I solved my problem. But see what you can come up with. Also, if you get down to a point where you're taking the average of those and then the average of those, and if you still can't find it between a sub 1 and a sub 2, if you still can't find it, well, guess what? Your number doesn't exist in the array. But how can you tell the computer that the number isn't there? And I'll give you a hint. If you've come down to two numbers, you're comparing the value between here and here, and the value, the value between here and here, and then you find the average, you get the number here. Well, that's an easy one. But if you get the number between here and here, and then it marks down again to here and here, and it's still not there, let's say you're looking for the value of 8, you have to have some code inside here that says, well, if you're on two consecutive numbers like this and you still haven't found it, that means your number isn't there, right? So this could be a 7 and this could be a much larger number. So you have to go by the index of those. So if you ask the computer, if the number is not between those two numbers and the indexes are consecutive, then you have to break out, and then you do send back a -1. So there's a lot to think about with this one. It's not a real straightforward problem. There's a lot to think about, and let's see if I can get this on here for you. Hold on just a second. So here's the code, and it has these values that we already went over, but like I told you, those aren't the actual values that I decided to use, and I want you to think about finding averages and why I didn't use these particular values, but there's something close. I think you can get it. And here's my why I haven't found it loop. Again, this could be an iteration. And then I found, the mid value, that's the high plus the low divided by 2. Remember, the high is the index value and the lower index value. And if that number is less than the value I'm looking for, then I'm going to move my low value is going to change into my mid value then, and then it does the whole thing over again. So basically that's the first part of the code. So the rest of it's very, very similar. I don't think you're gonna have to think too hard on it. Just remember that you have to handle several different circumstances, and a couple things that you might be a problem, might go wrong, is if you some of the parts that are difficult is if the number isn't in there at all. Sometimes you'll get an infinite loop. If it's the very last number, sometimes people get an infinite loop, or they'll get the wrong number, or they get the wrong value to come back. Like if I'm looking for a 5 and it actually is there and it doesn't show up. Let me see if I did that here. Yeah, so it is in order, but I'm looking for a 5, and I do have a 5, but it comes back with a -1, which is the symbol for I can't find your 5. So make sure you look through that and try to figure that out. I think if you think a little bit about it, you'll come up with it. All right, everyone. I hope that gave you enough of a hint to get you through this assignment. Do try to do it on your own as much as possible. But if you can't, go ahead and ask some questions. You can post your questions to Piazza. Try to get this stuff on your own. It's not going to do you any good to find the answer online and then just copy and paste. That's not why we're in this class. We're not in this class to learn how to look up answers. We're in this class to learn how to find the answers ourselves. So, all right, everyone, take it easy. Bye.